Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 2026 Directors Closeup Spirit Awards edition. I am Maria Raquel Bossi, Senior Director of Education and International Programs at Film Independent. Before we start, I want to acknowledge our sponsors. Thank you to this year's incredible supporters of the Directors Closeup, the Directors Guild of America, SAG Indie, and IMDb Pro. And thank you to our 2026 Film Independent Spirit Awards supporters. Premier sponsor Lavazza Coffee, principal sponsor IMDb Pro, and official partner Fiji Water. We appreciate their support of the independent film community. Tonight, we end up our director's close-up with the beginning of the process and sometimes the beginning of a career. Our nominees for Best First Screenplay, who most likely have been doing this for a long time and finally are getting the recognition they deserve for their hard work. They have written some of the most compelling films I have seen this year. Congratulations to you all, and thank you for sharing your experience with us tonight. Here with us are Elena Oxman of Outerlands. Elena, hello, how are you? Welcome. Next, we have Alex Russell of Lurker. Welcome, Alex. And last but not least, Constance Tsang of Blue Sun Palace. Hi, Constance. Our moderator for tonight is the writer-director of the Spirit Award-nominated Big Boys, Corey Sherman. Welcome, Corey. Where are you?
Hello.
Welcome. And thank you for doing this. Take it away and enjoy. Thank you.
Cool. So first of all, I just want to say I'm a big fan of all of these movies, so I'm very excited to talk about them. I think they're all really great and like very original screenplays. And I was just very impressed. And so when I was asked to do this, I was very excited I could get to actually talk to you guys. Some of these questions I actually am just curious about for my own writing. And I'm just like, wow, how did you guys pull this off? So yeah, congratulations on the nominations and very, very excited for all of you. So before we get into it, I'm curious if you could just tell us, for anybody who's watching who hasn't seen your movies yet, if you could just give us like a very brief, quick synopsis of what they're about. We could start with Elena.
Sure. Outerlands is about a 30-something named Cass who's living in San Francisco and kind of hustling between jobs. And they have a crush at a woman who works at a restaurant where they're a server and hook up with her one night. And she ends up skipping town and leaving Cass with her 11-year-old daughter. So that's the premise of Outerlands.
Great. Cool. Alex?
Why are you laughing? Um, my movie's about a young man who blackmails his favorite artist into being best friends with him. And it's about the toxic symbiosis that emerges from that relationship.
Constance?
So Blue Sun Palace, it's set in New York and Queens, and essentially it's about two strangers who come together after losing a person that they both loved. And it's really about, I guess, the sort of impressions that people make on our lives, and it might not be a long relationship, but it's a impactful one.
Cool. It's interesting to me, like already just hearing like how you guys define the movie in like the most bare bone terms. I think like my first question for you is like when you were writing this movie, it's like it's so much to like hold in your head, like writing an entire feature. And so I was curious, like if you each for each of you, like what your like North Star was. Was there like a specific like image or feeling or tone or even like character where you were like that thing like embodies the spirit of what I'm trying to do here, and like if I can pull that thing off, then like this will have been a success. And so was there anything like that you always came back to that was like this is the movie? And
Yes,
yeah, go ahead, Alex.
for sure. And it's like you're right. It's for me impossible to wrap my mind around everything that it's going to be. And for me, it's such an exploration of an initial feeling that evolves and intertwines and then starts to show you what it's really about. And I think for me, it was a feeling. It was sort of this like sweet, nauseous feeling that everyone has at the end of the movie. I had sort of going into the writing of it, and I sort of I felt this dissonance, I guess, or sickness about sort of all the unspoken things I was observing among young men. And I just wanted to explore that and see where it could go. And when almost every line in the movie is a lie, or is layered in some way, or is like feels both hollow and meaningful. And I think that sort of dissonance is like what I was going for, is when a line feels hollow and meaningful at the same time. And I think that's why it makes people sick, because it's so authentic and fake in on different sides of it.
And I'm just
So,
curious.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I didn't have anything else to say.
I was just going to say, was that something that you had been observing? You feel like you've been observing your whole life, or was that specific to your experiences within like the scene portrayed in the movie?
Whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, I've kind of always I've always been a new kid because I moved around like every year or two growing up. So I've always kind of been in the observer state for the first few months of assimilating into any new environment. So I think that was my way in. I was realizing today how many movies are that. Like even Mean Girls even is about starting at a new school, and The Sandlot is about moving into a new neighborhood and having to adjust to like all these established dynamics of people who already know how to play baseball. I don't know. I just noticed that today.
Yeah.
I think I don't remember the question.
No, it's a great answer. Constance, what about you?
I mean, I feel like, even in that short little log line I gave you, I feel like for myself, it really was this sort of grounded impressionism on how, especially for myself, like going through this writing process, I talked about this quite a lot in interviews and stuff, but I was going through a divorce at that time. I was figuring out, my how to really grieve in a sense. And, my father had passed away when I was quite young, and I felt like all of that, it didn't really manifest until this moment when I had started rewriting Blue Sun Palace. And for me, I just kept thinking about all these really significant relationships that I had in my life. And it always felt like people kind of came in and out. And I feel like that was the feeling I wanted to convey with Blue Sun Palace, like the ways that I think people can change your life. And it, honestly might not be for a long time, but it's still relationships that kind of change you and change your experience and change your relationship to the world. And I think that was really what sort of I hoped that was what I was going to capture with this film. And I think a lot about, because writing this film, I think a lot about the sort of the thing that is not said and the person who is not there. And I think about the way that the sort of spirituality or even the sort of like haunted presence is evoked in a lot of scenes. So I don't know, this sort of invisible person, I think, also was a sort of guiding motif for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it very, very much comes through in the movie.
That's correct.
Elena, how about you?
I like how you put it, Alex, this idea, the feeling that kind of starts things off, and it very much was like this feeling of being in my 20s and 30s, and a kind of, and that I knew other people had. I knew I wasn't alone. I knew it was something sort of that tapped into something people go through, which is a feeling of being lost, drinking too much. That's a big theme of the movie. I knew it was going to deal with alcohol in some way. Looking for connection, not finding it. And the image I kept coming back to is really this character. I began to develop this character in a short film I made in 2014 called Lit, which was also set in San Francisco and is about this kind of queer non-binary nanny who, sorry, not a nanny in that film. In my mind they were, but that wasn't explicitly stated in the script. But it's really, it was starts out at a bar, this club called the Lexington Club, which was one of the last queer bars in San Francisco. And I was interested in this idea of this character who's kind of in the city, that they've come to as a like transplant, trying to find chosen family, but is still kind of floating, not really able to find that. And they end up meeting a stranger at this bar, and they go on this sort of odyssey around the city at night. And that was like the seed that started Outerlands. But that character, I think the DNA was this person who's kind of closed off, kind of a lone wolf, kind of looking for connection, and really not sure where it is for them. So it was really a combination of like this certain kind of person I was interested in, and then my own experiences of being in my 20s and 30s. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear that it developed from like the seed of like a short film. Because my next question was going to be like about how the like story changed for you guys as you were working on these scripts. Like, was there a moment for you where it, like the story surprised you, where it was like, oh, I see this thing wants to become something different than I originally planned for, and I'm like, oh, like now I'm following. It's a detour, or it's like a big change, but like actually this is the better path. And
Definitely.
yeah, you guys can pick it up wherever.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm wanting that along the way, and my process sort of leaves room for surprising myself while going down a path. It's like you kind of know what the expected or what the cliche might look like, and then you have sort of an idea of what the expectations are of that path. But if you don't plot it out too structuredly, you can be like, oh, but actually, it's more interesting if we go down this way,
Yeah.
or if this character does the opposite. And you know when it makes you a little giddy that it's like a breakthrough, and that
Yeah.
it's like a little bit unexpected, and it's kind of cool that you're taking a left here. And I feel like only you know that when you're like, I'm very confidently going to take you over here instead. Um, but I would say there's that else sort of along the way, like along the like first draft. And then I don't know, because there's so many years in between the first time I wrote it and actually shooting it, there were times when I'm like, oh, here's like actually smarter, more clever thing to put right here. And then maybe that changes these three other beats, but like I know exactly like which pieces of the puzzle to like replace.
Yeah.
With like one or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Constance or Elena, was there a moment for that, like that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for myself, I started writing maybe like the first draft of the script like in 2019, and it was such a different story because it didn't have the structure that the film ends up being, and it was a very sort of single protagonist going through a very, very straightforward journey. And by the time that I got to the structure for this version of the film, it was like, 3 years in between that, and I had from when I first started writing in film school to when I left film school, like I have become also a much stronger writer in that time, and I understood what I wanted to do with the film and how I wanted to make films moving on from there. So it really changed as I developed, and I'm really happy for that time, to be honest with you. I think
Yeah.
that first version of the script would have been an awful thing to make. And
I want to know a lot more about that. And can we
Please.
spoil each other's movies?
Oh, sorry. Spoil? We should try not to.
I don't know if it's a spoiler, but can I just say it?
Well, I mean, Constance, like, I guess, yeah, there's like an important event that happens in your movie that changes things in a major way. It's totally up to you if you want to treat that as like
was that a part of this 2019 version?
it was, but it came at like the midpoint instead of it being
Totally.
the incident.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's super interesting.
I was really curious, like specifically with that, like what was the process like? Because it like really does kind of like split the movie. Like there's like an early part, like I felt myself being like, oh, like I'd expect, like I'm settling into like a specific tone and like a certain set of characters, and then there's a big shift. And I was amazed at how it all still felt cohesive, even though it really does change the movie dramatically. And I was just curious for you, like what the process was of like, yeah, like making it all feel like the same movie.
I feel like that has a lot more to do, at least for myself, or like how I understand it. It feels a lot more to do with like the visuals and the camera language and setting the tone. I think the
Yeah.
tone is like kind of how one and two become cohesive more or less. And I think at that time I had watched Began's A Long Day's Journey into Night. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it
Yeah.
kind of like the movie splits into two big parts. And I was like, wow, like this is amazing. Like that film, it is very distinctive parts, but still feels very like singular in the vision. And I really do think like the directing and the visuals had a lot to do with making the transitions work.
Yeah. Yeah. And so was that something you were just how you just sort of had trust in that during the writing process? You're like, once we actually get into the more like cinematography, like the tone direction, like all of that, like we'll make this cohesive.
Yeah, I think so. And even before, I think, writing and directing it's so closely connected for me, and I think for all the panelists here. And it's like when I write it, I can already see how the film will be, and I think that's really helpful,
Yeah.
and I think that's kind of like what makes everything feels like one, like our vision, I guess, more or less, and the cohesion of it all.
Yeah, that I mean that's I mean I'm so glad to be talking to like three like writer directors as well here because I wanted to ask you if shot listing or any or casting locations are those things that are like part of your writing process at all. Um just like
Now
basically
they are.
bringing in the director brain as early as possible. Elena, did you want to yeah, did you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In the case of Outerlands, I mean, all of the locations were places that I knew well, had hung out in San Francisco. I knew it was going to be a very location-based kind of film. The locations felt like characters, so that's an example. But also, there's a way I definitely feel my director's brain when I'm writing. One way I always feel it, I'm just thinking was working on my next project today. It's like when you're trying to figure out how to end a scene, for instance, or you can't help but think, what's that cut? Like what is
Of
that?
course,
The cut says so much. I didn't always used to do that when I was like, writing in Outerlands, just to circle back to the question you'd asked about that. I made so many mistakes in my first drafts around I just learned so much, put it that way is a better way to put it, but did so much writing before I really had the structure figured out and got attached to scenes and got attached to characters that ended up not being in the movie. Just took a lot of time to really learn the importance of structure, at least in how I now go about it, and character building, like really getting to understand who the characters are and then letting that guide the sort of plot or direction of the structure of the film. So really
yeah.
big learning experience. And in terms of that movie, I mean, so many characters were not in it that were in first drafts. There was a major decision around suppressing Cass's backstory, which
Hmm.
before was brought forward, and just kind of going. I think I always strive to go into the direction of simplicity. It's the films I admire most, or just doing the most with the least. And so that was a kind of learning a process about leaning really into the imagery as opposed to the sort of writing in terms of the dialogue. But you do lean into imagery through writing. That is part of the screenwriting process. It's just a different approach. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Alex, you were going to say about thinking about directing early on.
Was?
You,
Oh,
you seem to agree. You
oh,
seem
oh,
to
oh,
agree with that idea.
oh. I said now I do.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. That wasn't part of it before for you. Oh wait, I think you froze, Alex. Oh no,
sorry.
you're back. You're back.
Um, when I was writing the screenplay, I had no idea about the constraints that I would be facing because I did not see it as a movie that I would make, and I didn't even know what that meant. So I didn't think about like consolidating locations. I would just be like, all right, now they're on the airplane. Like now they're like
Yeah. Yeah.
in Holland or whatever. And I was
Yeah.
just like, that's free to write. But I think now, like, I think it's helpful to have the constraints of like, this may actually be made at a certain scale, so that when you're deciding between infinite writing paths, you're like, well, let me just go down the path that I could actually make.
Yeah.
And the more that you can put a box, even if it's artificial, around the thing you're trying to write, you could find something that doesn't go off the rails, I guess, or you could find some solution that's more elegant.
Yeah, that's totally true. Right. Like the way the limitation can help you actually come up with fresher ideas. Yeah, another thing I was curious about for all of you is like how you thought about like 3 act structure and like basically like screenwriting conventions in this, and is there something in your mind, like is there something in your script where you like a moment where you were like, I'm either going to really lean into a convention here and it's actually really helpful to me because it's what the movie needs, or I'm going to purposefully defy it and because I know that like it's wrong for the movie here, even on like a grand scale. I mean, you were talking about midpoint and like inciting incident. I mean, I guess in a way, Constance, you already answered that question about like a change that you thought of. But yeah, I was just curious if anything came up for any of you.
I can
I
say
guess
something.
it's, yeah, no, Elena, go first.
Okay, I can say something about that. Yeah, my instinct initially, and most of my instincts in terms of taste and everything lean toward a kind of more impressionistic sort of approach to narrative. But I actually, this being my first feature, I did make a decision and kind of a pact with myself. Like they always say, like, learn the structure, learn the convention before you try and break from it.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I'm not going to try and be like, Chantal Ackerman, let me try and do the like 3 act thing and see if I can do it. And it was actually so helpful to have that and to kind of like, read all the screenwriting books, really study that stuff and feel it. I do feel like that stuff in some way, we feel it in our bones. Like we just kind of know that and you feel it when it's wrong. In some ways, the books were so, okay. It's like, it's really a gut thing. And it feels, but that was not my initial instinct. I wanted to do like a character study that was very like handheld and gritty and in San Francisco and just who is this person? Not that that couldn't have narrative 3 act structure to it, but I was not thinking in those terms. So yeah, beginning to write with that in mind and outline, but again, really a learning experience in this one.
Yeah. What were you
Oh,
going to say, Constance?
no, I just started teaching screenwriting to like some Columbia students recently, and the first class was about like the language and craft of screenwriting, and I like honestly forgot like the sort of keywords that you sort of
Yeah.
like need in your first movie. Like
Yeah.
I have no idea where the like the rest, like the falling action, the first act turn, like all of these things that like I don't use, but I do feel it kind of similar to Lana. Like you kind of do feel it in your bones because like at least for myself, I had been writing so many screenplays in that structure that like even if I try to do something that is anti-plot, it will still be a part of like this consciousness that I have at
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
point. And I can't not think about that. But I think for myself, like it's much easier for me to write in sequences because it's kind of like, you do your 8 sequences and like at the end of these like sequences, I'm like, okay, it's time for a treat, And it's just so
Yeah.
much easier for me to like write a screenplay that way.
Oh, yeah.
And I think in these sequences, I'm like inherently thinking about yes, movement and change and all these words that we think about in craft, but the things that I think concern me, especially when we're getting into scenes and what are the sort of like tentpole moments, I think more like that. Like, what are the moments that we desire, and how do we get scenes to get to those moments that we desire?
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Alex?
Yeah, I think I'm in the middle of this right now because I'm halfway through another screenplay, and I've been going back through some of that type of education, like what are all these midpoints in history of
Yeah.
movies?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, so that's how they did it. This is how they did it. And it's like, why is it that like halfway through the story, I'm aching for something to change really dramatically? And I think it's just like everyone else is saying, like it's baked into your consciousness. And it's like, even if you try and do anti-plot, you'll find yourself, hanging lanterns. And at the same time, if you give yourself the challenge of, I'm going to do this by the numbers, you really can't help but like shirk convention.
Yeah.
So like, if any of us like was just like, I'm just going to do it like 3-act structure, like whatever, Sid Field, you're going to end up getting to some of those moments and being like, oh, I really know in my heart that like you're supposed to do this and I'm going to do this. And I think with Lurker, I was like toying with convention where it's like, I know where there's like this big villain speech is going to happen. And everyone thinks that there's going to be like this big confession. And actually, instead, it starts and we cut away and we just run down the aisle with another character. And that was so fun to do in this movie and it's like confusing sometimes for people if you're not into that, because you're like, oh, I was like waiting for that satisfying like explosion of violence or something like that instead of like the complete opposite. But so it's something to like, you can't help but keep it somewhat in mind, and it's something you can look at when you're struggling, when you're like, okay, I'm kind of in open water here. What is the cliche here?
Yeah.
What is the thing that would be normal to do? I know I don't want to do it, but let me just try it. And then maybe you try it and it's like, wait, that actually is just the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And it's okay that it's not unexpected. It still works. So yeah, it's like going back and forth between forgetting the rules and like learning them, because they really don't, they're not prescriptive, but you look at like every movie that you like and there's a midpoint normally.
Yeah.
It is really interesting to see ones where you can't feel that, though. You can't feel, I mean, to me, that's a sign of something really good. And those are what I admire. You just can't, you don't notice it doesn't poke out. It's so seamlessly, in there. And there's something about, I mean, all the structure of conversation, it feels like it's related to tension. Like we're working with like tension and releasing and it's like this very physical thing. I don't know about you guys, but like it feels very like music or something, and just working with emotional energy about compression and release. And but I love what you said about that you learn it and then you depart from it or do things different because you know that you don't want to do the cliche. Like
yeah, and you're like, you get to a point where you're enough in the heads of your characters that you let their psyche sort of evolve on its own or like guide the story, and that may be the best way to seamlessly add structure, because if your characters are doing the story on their own, then there's a natural structure to that. They're making choices, they're doing things, and there's tension because you want to know what happens next on a very basic level. I've been, this is like semi unrelated or more umbrella, but like the way I've been thinking about writing lately, or specifically writing features, is it's like if you do it every day, you're like stepping into a completely dark room where all you can do is like feel out the contours of like your character or like whatever shape of the story that you're building. And you can't turn on the lights ever. But if you go in there every day for like 2 months, you start to like know that, okay, this is kind of here, this is kind of here, this is kind of here. Now I can like work over here for a bit without having to refamiliarize myself with everything that I've done so far or everything that I've uncovered. And then for me, it's like, if I step away from that for 2 weeks and come back in, I have to like start at the beginning kind of. And it makes sense because it's like, how hard is it to get to know a person that you can't see or hear? like you have to like let them start to show themselves to you. Um, in the same way that like you can hang out with someone for a week and then not see them for 2 years, and you're like, oh, I forgot your name. That's why I'm really like I can't write multiple things at the same time.
Yeah.
I can't,
Yeah.
because it's like compounding the amount of sort of infinite not knowing of your characters. Like I forget people's names in life, and they're fully three-dimensional people that I get to see and hear their jokes without having to generate them myself. Um, but yeah, and then it's like over time it does start to get a little bit easier. But like the hardest part for me is like when whatever, you can't see the island you came from, and you like can't see the island that you're going to, and you're just in open water, and it's like too late to go back. Like kind of how I feel right now in the thing I'm writing. So like, oh, I guess well, I'll die going there, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, I mean, I did want to ask you about Matthew as a character, and basically like how you were thinking about controlling the audience's relationship with him, because I think at the beginning, like you were saying, like it's a natural thing to root for him because he's like a fish out of water and he's like the lowest on the totem pole, and so you want to see someone like that rise. But then as the movie goes on, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that he does some pretty like despicable things. And I was wondering how you were feeling. But you know, I know for me as an audience member, I was like with him and in his head the whole time. And I was wondering if that was something you were thinking about, where you were like, am I going to lose the audience here, or like, do I want the audience to always be rooting for him? Like, was that part of your writing?
No, I think I wanted to staggeredly lose people along the way.
Wow, yeah,
Not lose people, but give people the feeling of that's sort of that sickening dissonance of like, oh, I was so invested, I was so in this hyper individualistic POV. I was like, the way it's shot is like you're his imaginary best friend right next to him for the first like 70 minutes of the movie, and then you feel betrayed when he goes over some line, and that's different for everyone. And I think I really enjoy watching movies where I have to recalibrate where my sympathies lie.
Mm,
And I'm like, oh, why was I kind of into Nightcrawler? Why was I with him for that long? And it
yeah,
feels like a betrayal that's so personal when you lose we lose the audience's sympathy. And what I tried to do is like, even though you've been invested so much in this other character, you start to a little bit feel like the horror movie of the other main character and what it feels like when Matthew starts showing up at your door, even though that's the person that you've been closest to in this movie.
right,
Um,
right.
so that was kind of that's what I was trying to do. I really didn't want it to feel like a good guy, bad guy thing. I wanted it to feel like a thing where people do contend with their own, how relatable it is or isn't to them, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I love stuff where I'm like, am I into
Yeah, it's a
you
totally
got
different
me,
way
and
of
then you lost me, and then I'm back
yeah,
somehow.
yeah, totally. Yeah, Elena, I wanted to ask you about your protagonist too, because I think quite a different protagonist than Matthew. Um, and I wanted to basically, I mean, I think it's rare that you see a non-binary character in anything, like let alone like the lead of something. And so I was curious, like, what your connection was to that, like that character being non-binary, and what was like important to you about like depicting their experience in the whole movie.
Yeah. So the short that it was based on, Lit, the protagonist in that, I remember we started off writing and it was just tomboyish, but she, her at that point. And I knew this is like a part of me. It's how I was when I was a kid. I knew that I was writing from this part that was very just kind of more mask and more, had this kind of tough guy sort of persona. And, that's back in 2014. I think more and more is like non-binary. More of my friends came out as non-binary. I'm kind of like, I think I'm non-binary, but I'm not going to necessarily ask everyone to change my pronouns. But I feel that, I think as that developed, it just seemed natural. But really, it was when I started watching Asia Kate Dillon on Billions. And that is not a show. That was such a, like, not a show that I would typically necessarily be interested in, like hedge fund, Wall Street, like, but I just got super captivated by them actually, and knowing that they were the first like non-binary actor to play a non-binary character, and just got interested in them both on the show but off. And I think probably like you guys do too, if you get interested in an actor, you kind of watch like videos of them and YouTube interviews, and you just start to feel their energy. And Asia, I just started to think of as Cass. So it really was sort of a combination of those things that ended up being really grounded in this specific actor, and then send them the script. That was like really how Outerlands took off, was when I sent the script
Oh,
to Kate Dillon, and they really um, connected with it and wanted to do it. But non-binary, that their gender identity didn't end up being a major story point. But
right.
it is so much of their character.
Yeah, did you incorporate them into the writing process at all? I mean, really, this is a question for all of you because I'm curious, like, once you actually found your actors, did hearing the words in their voice make you be like, or did just talking to them about their character be like, oh, actually, I want to change this? Or did they contribute ideas like, oh, I want to adapt to this specific person?
Totally. But I just talked. Do you want to say something, Constance?
Constance?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I feel like for Blue Sun, especially, so I wrote the script in English, but my first language is Cantonese. So I was thinking in Cantonese, writing in English, and my actor spoke Mandarin.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of translation in like all sort of like all parts of this process. And from when we casted and going into rehearsals, all of the script basically was shifted and rearranged so that it felt like, first of all, the Chinese was Chinese that they would speak naturally.
Hmm.
And also with that said, like I workshopped the scenes again with them in mind. So we had like a 2 week rehearsal process where I sat with like the main actors and we just sort of like workshop what was working, what was not working, and also getting to each scene, we figured out the emotional beat that they needed to hit, and like all the other like dialogue things around it didn't matter so much as long as they understood what the scene was about.
Hmm.
So we really did sort of like had like a very, I guess in a way improv, but it was a rehearsed improv. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool.
I
Elena,
recommend.
what were you going to say about your experience working with Asia? Yeah.
Asia can't, right before we shot, Asia asked me to have a Zoom, and I noticed their voice was like much deeper, and they
Yeah.
told me they were transitioning. And so that was an interesting moment. We ended up working that um, into the character, into the script. It's very subtle ways. For instance, I don't, a lot of people might not notice it, but in their medicine cabinet, we see their testosterone and like in a little kit. And it changed the way they looked. Like we made decisions about when we show the sort of peach fuzz, and we changed something in the script about why they overdrafted their bank account, and we changed it to that it was a medical, something medical. So absolutely, that was that inflected the script in different ways. And then Asian themselves, I mean, I love actors like this where there's just so much. They're also in a way writers, and there's a lot of intelligence, and so they had a lot of interesting suggestions as we were workshopping it. We weren't, as y'all know, that you don't get a lot of rehearsal time in indie film, so we were kind of meeting on Zoom and just catching time where we could to talk through things. But they had a lot um, of input, and they actually came up the one time that the pronoun conversation happens in the
Yeah.
script. That was their idea. And something I didn't know was that that's because, and they went through this when they were trying to get Asia went through this when they were trying to get acknowledgement for not like just best actor, best actress, but have a non-binary version of that. They actually did a lot of activism around that with the awards.
Hmm.
But you have to mention pronouns for it to count as non-binary. So we actually need cast to be referred to as they, them for them to be
Oh,
considered a non-binary character. Otherwise, like,
how interesting.
Yeah. So that's sort of was in there, but then it worked. We were able to work it into the scene so it does have a sort of narrative value. It's not just thrown in there. There's something
Yes.
that happens between the characters that it relates to. So
Yeah, yeah. I think another thing I wanted to ask you all about, I think you all, I mean, it's cool. All your movies are like really specific to the cities that they take place in. And they're three very different cities. And I was just curious about those worlds as like places, like what excited you about capturing those specific worlds, and how that like factored into your writing process.
I'll just say something about San Francisco because
Yeah, yeah,
it's a huge part of Outerlands. That was
yeah.
definitely one of the main inspirations was I moved there in 2011. I moved to the Richmond district. Outerlands, for those who don't know, refers to the outer Richmond and Sunset, so the outer part of the city near the Pacific Ocean. And it had this very kind of there's a little bit of a lonely but beautiful little ragtag, not what you think of as a sort of like tech-centered downtown San Francisco. It feels on the outskirts. You see layers of history, these places like the diner, the bar where Cass hangs out, the laundromat. They just have this older feel. And I was super interested in that kind of layer of the city that's disappearing with gentrification. I think of it as like the analog soul of a digital city. And that was a big part of like wanting to capture that as the world of the film.
Wow, yeah, that's cool. You can really feel that. I'm not familiar with that part of San Francisco, so that was cool to see. How about for you, Constance?
I feel like for myself, like locations are so important for me. And when I was writing the script, so I grew up in Flushing, and a lot of where the film takes place is locations that I've known since I was a kid. You know, that construction store, the supply warehouse, like that's like a family friend, and it's like where I would spend some afternoons when I was a child. So it's all very much I guess in a way a part of me, and that's why I think it made it really easy to write a film like this because it's like so ingrained in my memory. And for it to be ingrained in my memory, everything else, including the characters, the world, the community, the tone, like all of that just like felt so much easier. And I feel like, you know, going down the sort of career path that we have, I would like to continue making films where I grew up, and I just feel like it's such a wonderful thing to even treat this medium as a way to like archive a part of
Yeah,
our own history and our own experience. And I don't know, I think there's something really magical about how locations can inspire filmmaking like this.
agreed.
Yeah.
How about for you, Alex? How was how did it what I'm curious what specifically about the world of
Everything that keeps coming to mind is so pretentious, and I'm trying to like
Well,
break it
honestly,
down.
it was one of my favorite things about the movie. I was like, wow, this is like capturing like such a specific milieu and that I've never seen on screen before, but just feels like extremely accurate. And I thought it was very cool also about how like you don't need to live in LA in order to like understand what's happening here. Like it felt incredibly detailed, but also it wasn't like inside baseball, if that makes sense.
Yes, so it is extremely LA, and like sort of the larger irony of LA like transplant is that like everything, all the it's like a hierarchy in a vacuum where like all these people in this movie came from somewhere else and have created this sort of house of cards that is their power structure. And it is not lost on me that the literal house that we shot in burned down in the LA fires.
Hmm.
Like it felt so like we were capturing this thing that was elusive, that is very LA, that like is the same sort of tenuous feeling that like these characters are trying to capture. Like they're trying to bottle their relevance and their importance to each other and the world. And everyone has like a different idea of who their audience is. But they have created this ensemble, and like they don't know. I don't know. I guess the world I drew it in a certain way because everyone who's from somewhere like knows who they want to impress. But like everyone, LA is full of people that like they're like, I'm trying to impress the whole world.
Yeah.
Because I don't necessarily know what my tribe is or who my people are, or I feel rejected by them. So I'm here in Hollywood now. And I think that was a subconscious thing, but it was also just like an anchor. It was like one thing I didn't have to think too much about because I knew the areas, I knew the spaces. I know Altadena, I know Pasadena, I know downtown, I know Echo Park, I know Silver Lake. I know when something feels like authentic to the space in LA. So it was like one anchor that I had. And sometimes, it's like how people like talk about directors having OCD about like whether it's this cup or that cup. I don't think it's because the actual cup makes that much of a difference to the image so much as sometimes you just psychologically need an anchor to the thing that you're making so that you can do the other hard parts. And for me, so much of like riding this tone throughout the movie had to do with being like, okay, I understand that we're here or we're in this type of place. I can be in the scene now.
Yeah,
and I can do all the other work.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Cool. Well, I want to make sure we take some time to answer audience questions, and we can start with one that's relevant to what we were just talking about. This is for you, Constance. This is from George, and he asks, your film had mostly confined environment shots. Was that in your screenplay as your visual template, or were they done for economical reasons? It created a beautiful intimacy.
Yes and no. I think it was so when I shot the film, we had a lot more exteriors and there was much more of the world that was shown. But in getting to the editing process, I started to feel like it didn't quite make sense and it really detracted, I think, away from the central relationship and the first part of the movie. So these intimate spaces became much more amplified, I would say, in the editing process, which actually in another way is it's another way of writing the film again, right? So it definitely was economical in the sense that we didn't have too many takes of camera angles and setups, but it definitely came from, I think, the editing process.
Cool.
Can I
Yeah,
say something about Constance's movie?
please.
It's like when you go outside, when you leave that area and it becomes exterior, not to spoil anything, it feels like the world has gotten so much bigger. So if you like if you are confining to these infinite space or intimate spaces, like you have something to explode outward with if you want to later.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask on top of that, like, there's like within these like spaces, there's like basically like scenes that play out with like so visually, with only like a few elements, because yeah, like they might be taking place in like a small room in a massage parlor with two actors, but they're so engaging to watch, and like so much is communicated without dialogue. And I was curious for you in like the writing process, how much of that was mapped out versus like, let me just figure this out in the space with the actors, you know?
A little bit of half-half. I mean, I think in the writing process, I had a sense on how I would write these long takes. And I feel like, to make a film that is solely just like one take per scene,
Yeah.
it has to be in the writing process. Otherwise, it doesn't really quite work. So I was thinking a lot about how one sort of image can sustain the choreography of something like that. But the actual blocking itself, like I had known I wanted to, because again, we didn't have that much money, we had to figure out how to elevate the film. So I decided to put kind of like all my cards in like the blocking and the choreography of it. And I feel like it was a mixture of, also I can't remember the question anymore, but I feel like it was a mixture of like having the script be a blueprint and then the space telling me and the actors telling me what was the best place and where was the best camera setup in order to capture all of these, yes, actions, but also dynamics, the power differences, like all of these things. Like it's like that, I think has to be done on set.
Yeah. Yeah.
With real people, you know, like not just like my little toy
Final
film.
draft.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
doesn't work like that.
Okay, cool. We've got another question. This is a little bit of a longer one, but it's for all of you. This is from Omar. They say, I have a question for all of you regarding your writing process. I've written a few features myself, and for me, it is not the film telling me where it wants to go, actually, because you unintentionally insert a huge part of yourself into a film. So at each stage, the film actually tells me something about myself I didn't realize. So in a sense, writing the film is you developing awareness about who you are, because ultimately it's a medium to tell your own truth. So I'm curious, do you have a similar experience, or how different is your approach psychologically, not just technically?
It's a
So
good
yeah,
question.
if I yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, like what did this, did this movie teach you something about yourself?
Yeah. I'll,
I want to hear what
um,
you have to say, Alex.
well, I feel like I bring this up all the time, but like it's that there's some Paul Schrader quote where he talks about Taxi Driver, and he's like, I wrote this movie because it's the guy I'm trying so hard not to be. And I think I think a lot about autofiction versus abstraction, and like what's the middle ground of your way in versus like just telling your exact story versus using some of your imagination. And I do think you can't you can't write anything without relating to the characters. At the same time, if you are just like, oh, my life is so interesting that it's like a day in my life, everyone needs to watch this, like it's going to be boring. So it's a negotiation between what is specific to like your psyche or what you can relate to, and then what might be some like more universally relatable story. And in a way, it's an experiment. You're throwing something out there that is a communication, and you're kind of hoping people get it. And I don't know if you guys have this feeling now, like that people are seeing your movies where it's like, oh, there's sort of like a tiered uh under comprehension of the movie, where like some people get it on a very basic level, some people don't get it at all, some people can read into the layers of it, some people like it for the wrong reasons, some people hate it for the right reason. That's the one that you fear the most.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And all of that is like you can't get everyone to like it or get it.
Yeah.
But you can throw it out there, and it's extremely rewarding when people totally do, or people can talk about it in a way that's smarter than you. And I feel like that was part of what I felt, is like, I am not very articulate in prose or very academic, but I can explore something through a screenplay. Like that is how I'm going to sort of unspool something that's been bouncing around in my head or in my psyche or in my emotions, and what comes out of it feels true in its own way, if I know that like I did the thing that I was trying to unspool. And only you know that.
Yeah, yeah,
Only you know if you like kind of like got it all out there.
totally. Yeah, Constance or Elena, yeah, how do you feel about that?
I was just gonna say, to the question, yeah, I feel like it is about you. It's all about you, and it's also nothing about you. It's like both at the same time. And I mean, because I agree. I think Alex said, it's like you begin listening. You're making something that then begins talking to you. You're making like a thing. It's like alive. And your job actually is to keep it alive. Like we all know what it feels like when something's dead on the page or when dead on the screen, you know? And it when it's alive, you're doing this. I mean, it's a beautiful and lucky thing that we get to do because it's so personal. It's coming from somewhere very personal, but it's coming into this space that's shared and between us. And to me, that's the whole, it doesn't really even matter, exist, right? Till people see it, till it meets the audience. I heard this author I love named Rachel Cusk. She writes books, but I think of her as very filmic. She talks about how people this concept of like dream reading. It's like your book hits someone and the audience dreams it. The reader begins to dream it. I think of like dream watching, like the movies hit people and they all are having a different dream in a way, a different experience of it. And yeah, sometimes I hear those and I'm like, hell no, that is not what I meant. Sometimes it is, but in some ways that doesn't
Did you get
matter. I
that
don't know
from
if it
that?
connects and if it's alive, if something lives and is coming, like being exchanged between the art and the audience, then it's there's like magic there.
Yeah, that's something that's really true of Rachel's books, I feel, is like I was very taken by how sort of she's like not talking about herself at all, but you can feel
Yeah.
her like presence in the scene, but it's more like she's like telling a story that she, I guess, is like an observer of between other people, and you never really get the details. You're just like, oh, now she's like in this location. I thought that was so interesting as far as like this conversation of abstraction and autofiction. The line that like yeah.
Yeah. She's another great example of like tension, like with the most, you don't see a structure, but there's like tension. You're like, why am I so tense? I'm just hearing some conversation between people about nothing, but there's something being like created in there structure
Yeah.
wise too.
Constance, I want to make sure you got a chance to answer that too.
No, I agree with both my peers on this. I feel like especially I had so this next film that I'm writing, it's I think much closer, I think to me as like a recognizable like sort of auto fiction in the characters. An exec said to me in the very early stages, he was like, you know, your trauma is not interesting to other people, and like your therapy is not interesting to other people. And in a sense, like it's true. I mean, it's not so much about like regurgitating like a conversation I would have with a therapist. Like that's not what film should be about. Like, and I feel like to some extent whatever I'm trying to explore in Blues and Palace or even my next film, of course it'll be tied to me, but I want to also have the film be something more than just sort of the sort of base layer of what I'm going through and what the like, you know? And
Totally.
I I think that's sort of like when a film really is able to fly a little bit, when it becomes more than your own story. And it's not, and I don't want the film just to be for me, you know, and I'm not trying to make films just for me. So I constantly think about like, yes, I feel so tied to the pieces I'm writing, and I think inherently for all of us here, it's going to be our story, but it's also not. And I'm happy that it's not. And I think there has to be some sort of even like a boundary in a way.
Totally, totally. I think it's something all three of your movies do beautifully. Yeah, I think that's a great note to end on as well. So I just want to thank all three of you for coming. This has been such a great conversation. I learned a lot. Congratulations again on the nominations. I think you all should just be so proud. So thank you for joining us.
Thank
Corey,
you
have
so
Thank you
we
much.
so
met
much.
before?
We did. We met at the brunch.
Yes, that's right. Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
All right, cool. Well, I hope you all have good nights and see you at the awards, hopefully.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.